Thanks to this law, there's an Obamacare plan that most folks can get with $0 premiums. Co-pays will still be there, but $0 premiums. 4 out of 5 Americans shopping on the Obamacare marketplace can get quality health care with a premium of $10 a month or less.
President Biden talking about the Obamacare subsidies included in the $2 trillion stimulus bill that he signed into law last month. And back in January, just days after he took office, the president, he signed an executive order to reopen enrollment in the Affordable Care Act. Now, this all comes after Donald Trump spent 4 years trying to gut Obamacare with his own executive action and lawsuits that made its way all the way to the Supreme Court. But the ACA is still standing and even expanding. A brand new book describes the battle to get the Affordable Care Act passed in the first place, where it falls short and how it's evolved over the years. It's called The 10-Year War, Obamacare and the Unfinished Crusade for Universal Coverage. Andrew spoke with that book's author, Jonathan Cohn, recently.
Jonathan, in your book, you draw a line from Obamacare, especially its lack of public option or anything pushing towards universal coverage, and what became essentially the default Democratic position on health care in 2020, which is supporting universal or near universal health coverage. How did that happen? What happened in the years between 2010 and 2020 to shift the Democratic position so dramatically?
Well, I don't know if they would say it was quite so much a dramatic shift. I mean, as far as the way I look at it, I mean, the Democratic Party has been about universal health care really going back since the time of Franklin Roosevelt and Harry Truman. Remember, it was Harry Truman in the 1940s who came out and said we should have a universal healthcare system and campaigned on it. And Democrats had been sort of campaigning on it again and again and again and trying to get there, failure after failure after failure. They did make a big breakthrough with Medicare and Medicaid in the 1960s, but that was really the one big success. So in 2010, really Democrats were saying, look, we're going to keep trying to get to universal coverage. This plan will get us as close as we think we can get right now. It'll put kind of the key pieces in place. And then hopefully once that's done, we will be able to then come back and improve on it and eventually get to the point where healthcare is a right in this country, like it is in every other developed nation.
The Democratic frustrations with Obamacare that you write about make me think of an old quote from FDR that I believe President Obama echoed to a group of activists. I think he was talking about healthcare, but I could be wrong. FDR and Obama both reportedly told their supporters, "You've convinced me, now go out and make me do it," essentially saying, I'm with you on the policy, but the politics don't add up until you change the politics. Are we seeing that Obama prophecy sort of come true? Is this the result of the public forcing leaders to take action?
I think to some extent, yes, and it always is. I mean, you wouldn't have had the Affordable Care Act, you wouldn't have had Obamacare if not for the activism that led up to it. And now we're seeing this new push, in part because you have advocates who are pushing from that. And by that, I do include people like Bernie Sanders, who is advocating, obviously, for something even bigger. I mean, he wants Medicare for all, which would be, really kind of to wipe the board clean and have a new government plan. But simply being part of that push to have, the broad idea that we need to do more on healthcare, it really makes a difference. And I think that's one of the reasons we're having this debate now.
What about the other side of the aisle? In your book, you note that the Republican Party has backed universal coverage in the past. Nixon did so, Romney as well. We've seen some Republican governors expand Medicaid, some grudgingly, but that's pretty much about it. Can Democrats get Republican buy-in on health care? And if so, how? Or do they have to do it alone?
I mean, right now it's pretty tough. The Republican Party of 2021 does not look like the Republican Party of Richard Nixon. What happened in a funny way is that, Obama and the Democrats in 2010, partly because they were so desperate to succeed, they'd failed so many times, they basically co-opted the sort of conservative ideas of how you would get to universal coverage. They basically said to Republicans, look, we really want to do universal coverage. You guys don't like government, so we'll do this method that really leans on private insurance, which and you guys have, some of you at least, seem kind of interested in that. And instead of having by moving to the center, the hope was that some of the Republicans would move to the center and you'd get this kind of bipartisan agreement. Actually, something very different happened, the opposite. And Republicans just all moved further to the right. Today, it's not just that Republicans oppose Obamacare. I mean, they basically oppose universal coverage, just the concept. And so it's really hard to see how you can negotiate with that if your goal is to get everybody covered, because that's just simply not something the Republican Party today wants to do.
What's driving that Republican opposition to universal health care? They'll say it's about freedom and choice and keeping the government out of it, but I'm wondering, is there something else driving it? Is it corporate influence, insurance influence? What's motivating the Republican position?
Well, can we do an all of the above here? I think there's several things going on. So some of it is the opinions of sort of corporations and interest groups that don't want it. The Republican Party as a whole has become more extreme philosophically in its opposition to government, again, compared to where it was, say, in the 1970s or even in the 1990s. Just there is this hardcore opposition to anything that expands government services. And then finally, at least when we're talking about healthcare and Obamacare, I mean, it is, you look at the history of the last 10 years, and I talk about this a lot in my book, it is just impossible to miss the fact that the opposition to Obamacare, it was as much about the Obama part as it was about the care part. This was a fight with Obama. It was opposition to Obama, and it was an opposition to what Obama represented. And look, I think some of that was about race, and there was a layer of that. And to be clear, there were plenty of people who opposed Obamacare for reasons that had nothing to do with race.
Jonathan, for a moment, I wondered if the U.S. experience with COVID would impact the debate on health care and health coverage. Lots of Americans lost their jobs and with it their health insurance. I thought we might see an effort to decouple health insurance from work. I also thought maybe the focus on care might lead to a new push for universal coverage, given the shared experience that so many have had. It doesn't feel like either has happened, or has it? Do you think we might see something of a COVID bounce on health care, so to speak?
The jury's a little bit out on that, and I think we need to wait and see where we go with this. I think it's certainly sensitized people to the importance of healthcare generally. It has not, right away sparked a big, we don't see people in the streets demanding Medicare for all right now as a result of this. But I do think there's a more subtle way it can move the cause forward, and it's this. If these COVID relief measures work, then we're in a place 6 months from now or a year from now. The economy is recovered, vaccinations have worked, and we're past the pandemic. And if people associate that in their minds with some of the steps that the Biden administration had the federal government take, then I think we might start to see faith in the federal government start to build up again. And people might say, gee, government can help us. Government can do good. And if we have that mentality, I think getting to a universal coverage program, truly universal coverage program where everybody has insurance, I think becomes a lot more realistic.
Jonathan Cohn is a correspondent with Huffington Post. He's also the author of The 10-Year War, Obamacare, and the Unfinished Crusade for Universal Coverage. Fantastic conversation, Jonathan. Really appreciate it. Thanks.
Thanks for having me on the show.
And coming up next, Amazon booming as people click instead of shop. But what is good, though, for the shoppers in Amazon may not be so good for the rest of the country. After the break, the author of a new book showing the huge impact the company has on millions of people from coast to coast will join us to explain.